12. This is kind of the time of the week that we have our usual Livepeer community call. And so this one's going to be a little different. We are going to have a community Q&A about Livepeer's scaling proposal called Streamflow. And it's going to be moderated by Nelson Ryan, one of our active community members who's been digging in and doing a bunch of research. So we actually didn't promote the link for the call itself. I don't know how many people will join this hangout, but we are streaming live on crypto.livepeer.tv, and we're recording it, and we'll post the content afterwards. And a lot of community members have sent questions. So I think we don't necessarily need to wait a few minutes for people to join the call to get started. We can probably dive right in. So first, Nelson, thank you very much for joining us and for offering to moderate this discussion about Streamflow. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and why you're interested in Livepeer?
Yeah, sure. So hi, my name's Nelson. So I'm actually head of APAC at the Reserve, but today I'm here as a Livepeer community member. Yeah, I've been really engaged in Livepeer. I think it's a really exciting project. And me and Doug came up with the idea to sort of do a bit of a Q&A to sort of break down Streamflow and talk about some of the sort of high level concepts to get a bit of a better understanding of what it's all about. So yeah, look, so I think why don't we just dive straight into it? So we've posted in a few of the different avenues, so Discord and Reddit, a bit of a call out to the community to post their questions. So to start off, I had a few that I've prepared. So we might start from the start. So what is Streamflow and why is it important for the future of Livepeer?
Awesome. So earlier this week, we published a paper called Streamflow, and it was a scaling proposal for Livepeer, right? And all this is essentially a proposal to take the current Livepeer proof of concept network that's been live for 7 months and to make it more scalable, more cost effective, and more reliable, performant for actual developers who use video infrastructure at scale, right? If you look at the current alpha proof of concept, it works and you can broadcast video through Livepeer, and it's been used for one-off events like conferences and meetups. But due to kind of the early implementation on Ethereum and some of the kind of first pass implementation choices that we made to make this thing live and to release it, it's too expensive, not reliable or scalable enough for actual video developers who are doing 50 or 100 or thousands of concurrent streams at one time to actually use Livepeer and get cost savings. But the whole point of what we, why Livepeer should exist and the impact that it can make is that we can dramatically drive down costs. And so this Streamflow set of proposals just outlines the next kind of changes and iterations to the protocol to solve all these scalability and cost effectiveness issues so it can be usable. And we can talk about what the current weaknesses are and what Streamflow includes to solve them.
Okay, cool. So the next question I wanted to go through was how will Streamflow impact transcoding and delegating within Livepeer?
Sure. Would it help if I quickly ran through some of the changes that Streamflow introduced first, so people have a little bit of a background?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Great. So a lot of the kind of side effects and weaknesses of the current protocol have to do with when a video developer or broadcaster wants video encoded, they have to ask the blockchain to assign them to a specific node who's going to do the work, right? Mm-hmm. And that takes a transaction on Ethereum. And then when that node does all the work and they want to prove they did it correctly, get paid, they have to do about 4 transactions on Ethereum in order to do that. So transactions on Ethereum are slow and they're expensive. And so if you're just being assigned, one transcode worker and you have to wait 15 seconds for that confirmation, that introduces, a potential delay. You have to pay the cost of doing that transaction. And even worse, that transcoder is not available or not online, or they're not doing your job effectively. In the current version, you don't have any recourse. You have to do another transaction to hopefully get assigned to another transcoder. And that might create reliability issues and latency issues and be a non-starter. And then from the transcoder perspective, doing those, for transactions to cash in your payments on chain might be very expensive. It might totally mitigate all of the fees that you're charging to do the encoding. So it makes the network more expensive. So what Streamflow does is a couple big concepts. One is that it takes this negotiation of who your transcoder is going to be off chain. You can negotiate many transcoders. You can get price quotes. You can choose one who's fast and reliable and close to you. You can use the redundancy that you want and work with multiple transcoders at the same time. If they don't do the work effectively, you can switch very quickly. So that's going to be a huge reliability and performance gain. And then the other big difference is on the payments side. We're going to shift the way the payments work to use a mechanism called probabilistic micropayments that we can talk about, where transcoders will just be getting paid as they're doing the work. And they can just cash in eventually on the blockchain when they've earned enough money to be worth it to cash in. So they no longer have to do 4 transactions in order to prove that they did the work and get paid. Some other changes there about verification. And finally, and I'll stop talking in a minute, should mention I've been using the word transcoders, but Streamflow also introduces a new term called orchestrators. And the idea here is that right now, there's only 15 active transcoders on the network. They have to be online 24/7. They're protocol aware. They're, the nodes talk to the blockchain. They talk to broadcasters, and they also transcode video. And the idea here is that, well, the transcoding of video should be performed by kind of what I'll call like dumb hardware, like just hardware that's awesome at transcoding video. There should be many of these pieces of hardware. They could be GPUs or CPUs that are idle. They don't need to be protocol aware. They don't need to know about Livepeer. And the idea is an orchestrator is someone who is protocol aware, who knows about Livepeer. And it's really similar to what the current transcoders are. But what they'll do is they'll receive jobs, and then they will just orchestrate a pool of transcoder processes to actually do the work. And that can make it more scalable, more reliable, and separate out the hardware side of actually encoding video from the software, node operator, security side, staking side of being protocol aware, online 24/7, interacting with the blockchain. And we can get into the details of what that means as well. So that's like the quick Streamflow overview.
Okay, cool. So there's quite a bit to unpack there. So one thing I did want to just touch on before we move on was in regards to probabilistic micropayments. So obviously, like the goal behind that is to make Livepeer more scalable. So how would that work in practice? Like, I know that you said you would have like an open balance, and then you can kind of collect that at a certain point. Is the idea to sort of, I guess, create a system where you can close your balance like monthly or weekly, to sort of really condense the amount of transactions happening?
Yeah, good question. So the super high level overview of what probabilistic micropayments are, let's use the example where you, Nelson, are the orchestrator, and I'm a broadcaster and I'm paying you to encode my video, right? So the idea is, with every segment of video that I send to you, I also send you a payment ticket, right? And that payment ticket, it's a little bit like a lottery ticket. It might be a winner or it might be a loser. And if it's a loser, it's not worth anything. And if it's a winner, you can cash it in on chain in order to get your money. Right? And the idea here is that, let's say you only want to cash in every time you've earned 1 ether.
Yeah.
Right. Then every ticket that I send you, if it's a winner, is going to be worth 1 ether. But the probability that that ticket is a winner might be very, very small if you're charging me a very small amount to encode 1 segment of video. So maybe 1 out of only 100,000 tickets is a winner. So so I'm going to keep sending you tickets, and if you win, you get to cash out $1 or an ether from me. But most of those tickets won't be winners. And the idea is, if you do enough work with enough users over enough period of time, will probabilistically get paid the exact amount that you're owed. Oh, yep, and you get to control, oh, it's only worth it for me to cash in when it reaches 1 ether, or when it reaches 0.1 ether, or when it reaches 0.01 ether. It's kind of up to you as an orchestrator when it's worth it to cash something in, and you can set that parameter. So that was the quick overview of PMs. Now I'm trying to remember your initial question, or if that answered it.
No, that's good. That answered it. And so the other thing I'd like to unpack a little bit more is, so if I'm like a new sort of community member and I'm trying to figure out if like being an orchestrator makes sense for me, or being a transcoder is more appropriate, how should I like think about that?
Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned today, there's just the concept, it's called a transcoder, right? And it's really doing both roles. It's doing orchestration and transcoding, right? Now, when Streamflow comes out, separate these roles, but it's really more of a conceptual split and a kind of a DevOps split in terms of like what processes you're running. So, you know, all the current transcoders they'll become orchestrators because they're already doing that, right? And they will also be running, you know, at least one transcoder process that will transcode video. And so the first step is that they will just run multiple transcoder processes if they want to scale how much video they can process, right? So instead of just starting one Livepeer node, they might start, you know, 1 in orchestrator mode and 10 in transcoder mode, right?
Okay.
Right, and then, you know, I'd call that like a private transcoder pool. So as a community member wants to participate, the way they would do it is they would probably register as an orchestrator, and then they would start as many transcoder processes as they want, you know, 1 or more. And that looks, you know, similar to the way it looks today. Now, what would be really cool is if someone in the community created a public transcoder pool where they said, I'll run an orchestrator, but I'll let anyone who wants to be a transcoder to transcode video in my pool. And then they could tap into kind of this decentralized workforce and this idle hardware all around the world that they don't own. Now, there's some challenges with that public pool. Like, it's an open research area because orchestrator provides all the stake. And if one of those transcoders, you know, encodes video incorrectly, then the orchestrator's stake might get slashed. Yeah. And so there's a challenge. So the orchestrator can either check the work themselves, which adds an additional cost, or they can, you know, let multiple transcoders race and compare the results and see if they gave the same results that wouldn't be slashed. But it's a research problem. Or they could secure it economically and make those transcoders, you know, lock up some stake in a smart contract. And if the orchestrator gets slashed, they could slash the transcoder stake. But this is designing these public pools is a design challenge, and it's suspected it might come with additional costs relative to a private pool where an orchestrator doesn't have to check the work of their own transcoders because they're running it, you know, that it's not, you know, they're not being cheated essentially.
Okay, cool. And so in that scenario, if there were pools and I joined, I guess the advantage there would be that someone could join and wouldn't be required to have 24/7 uptime. Is that
exactly? Yeah, exactly. I'm hearing some music here. Let's see if not sure what.
Hi,
hello.
Hi, this is the interpreter here for Josh.
Hey, welcome. We're just in the middle of a Q&A here, so we'll press on, but welcome to the call.
Okay.
Well,
great.
so Nelson, you were saying if there was public pools, then what was the question? It would allow anyone to join the network.
Yeah, and like would you require 24/7 uptime if you were just joining a pool?
Right. So that's the beautiful thing about a pool, and that's what would open a public pool, and that's what would really open up Livepeer to anyone with hardware, kind of like proof of work mining, where they can come and go as they please. They would just basically be competing or racing to be the first one in the pool to encode the video, if that's the architecture of the pool, right? But I think that's what you want to incentivized. That would be really powerful.
Yeah,
so maybe
okay.
maybe like the cost savings that you get by opening this up to everyone and letting people put their idle hardware to compete to do this would maybe mitigate the cost that you have to pay to check the work, essentially, in order to not get slashed. But I think that's an interesting open research area. I think it's like a big community opportunity. And I actually think that there's a community node that is offering a grant for someone who wants to work on that problem. So that might be interesting.
And so in that scenario where you had someone joining this pool and they caused the wider pool to be slashed, how do you think the pool operator could ensure against that risk or mitigate it?
That's the design challenge, right? So the most like crypto economic answer I can think of is that the people who opt into that pool themselves would have to stake into a second layer protocol, right? So then maybe you can't just turn on your hardware. Maybe you have to turn on your hardware, but also acquire some token or some ETH or whatever the asset is and stake it into this pool. And then you have to sign your encodings with your key, so it can be proved that you represented this encoding. And then if it can be shown that that caused a slash, you could be slashed as well. And that's one example. Another is some other sort of governance structure, like a DAO, where maybe it's not totally public, but maybe like the DAO approves people who buy into the DAO or stake into the DAO as trusted members, and then we're not going to check their work, but the DAO collectively is slashed if the node itself is slashed, right? Or you could just use redundancy. Like you could say, hey, we're going to let all these disparate people race to check this, and we're not going to trust it if any of them disagree, and then we're going to do some second order encoding before we send this segment back. So I think there's a lot of design opportunities, but what is secure, what is the best, what's cost efficient, it remains to be seen.
Okay, yeah, cool. And
what's interesting is they're actually outside of the Livepeer core protocol. They're kind of like second layer protocols for these pools that people can get creative and design around how they want.
Hey, Doug, do you mind touching upon how revenue is shared between orchestrators and transcoders in the way you envision this system?
Yep. So in Streamflow, the orchestrator is the one who provides the stake and earns the revenue, kind of as like a first order protocol effect. And like I said, I think the most likely thing is the orchestrator is the one running the transcoder processes themselves. So that's the same, it's the same entity. So there's no revenue share to the transcoders via the Livepeer protocol. If you can create a public pool, then you would probably want to, you could do it the Bitcoin miner way, where you're just trusting the orchestrator, who's the pool operator, to pay out correctly based on who did the work. Or I think it's more interesting to do a second layer protocol where a smart contract then, distributes the fees to the transcoders who prove that they did the work correctly. But that becomes, again, a scaling and design challenge, right? Does that make sense, Jake?
It does make sense. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, cool. And so I guess the next question, so what impact will uncapping the number of transcoders have on the network?
Yeah, good question. So this touches on the point that right now there's 15 active transcoders, and that's kind of an arbitrary and small limit during the alpha, so the network could be tested and kind of pre-scale and whatnot. But we want to dramatically increase the number of transcoders on the network, right? And the exact mechanism, there's a few proposed mechanisms, and we're receiving feedback, and there's a lot of debate, and the exact mechanism that will be used to do that is still to be determined. But basically what you want to do is you want to let anyone who can provide enough stake or security to give enough confidence to developers and broadcasters that their jobs will be encoded correctly, you want to let them compete on the network, right? And so this arbitrary limit of only 15 means that it's not accessible to compete on the network because all the stake is spread amongst the top 15. The minimum that you need to break in keeps growing, so that is really inaccessible. So one of the leading contenders is just a minimum stake amount, and anyone who knows what that is and can reach that provides enough security for kind of the average broadcaster, and can compete on this network and makes it into the service registry. So what you'll see is a lot more orchestrators. They'll all be active. They'll all have the right to compete on this equal playing field. Nodes can discover them offline and negotiate with them, and observe their ping times and their transcoding times and continue doing work with them if they're doing a good job. And so what it'll mean for the average token holder is that now there's a lot more kind of nodes to choose from in terms of who you delegate to. And you kind of have this known ability to activate someone. If you've earned token through inflation, you know that you can put it to work in order to activate a new node who is offering a fee share or reward cut back to you. They kind of want to offer that to you in exchange for the stake that you're providing them so that they can become active and compete. And so it actually increases the activeness of the role of the delegator as well. And if we can actually achieve a cost-effective and scalable network, and you start to see real usage of the network, you'll see fees flowing through the network in ETH, and that again creates a much more active role of the delegator and thinking about, well, if there's very little fees like there is today, they can kind of just sit back and they know what kind of inflation they're earning, and there's not a lot of action they can do to change their impact. But once there's a lot of fees flowing through, and it's really competitive of who earns and gets these, delegators would probably want to be a lot more active in terms of moving their stake around in order to kind of maximize the fees that they're earning from the nodes that are doing great work.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I guess, so one of the challenges that I think we have seen in the past is for a lot of users, it's quite tempting to just delegate to whoever has the highest stake. So how are you guys sort of thinking about like encouraging decentralization, right? Because obviously in the early stages, even though it is opening up, there's 15 people that have, I guess, like essentially a bit of a head start.
Yeah, so they have a head start in terms of like how much stake collectively is on them, but like remember, they don't own all that stake. That's the stake of all the delegators, right? So once fees flow through the network, in a way that actually may work against them if they are not sharing a lot of fees back to the delegators, or they're not effectively winning the work. So just to use round numbers, let's say a node makes 1 ether in a day from broadcasting video. Well, if that ether has to get split amongst 200,000 LPT worth of delegation, and they're only sharing 10% of it as a fee share, that's being split very, very thin, right? If there's a node that's up and coming who's running really fast hardware, who's located close to a broadcaster, who's winning a lot of work and doing a good job and earning a lot of fees, if they're earning 1 ether and sharing 10% of it and only have 10,000 stake, well, each of those delegators is earning a lot more ether, and so you'll see stake shift towards that node, kind of chasing those fees, and then you'll see the other nodes needing to react by running better hardware, more bandwidth, closer to broadcasters where there's demand, maybe sharing greater fee shares, and I think you'll see kind of delegation move around. So the other things that actually increase the decentralization in video in particular have to do with like locality and performance. So if an orchestrator is located close to a broadcaster, then they may have a faster response time. They may decrease latency when they're encoding the streams. And so wherever there's demand to broadcast video, there's opportunity for people to service that demand and compete kind of on the local and fully distributed level. So again, I think delegation will follow who's generating fees, and the other thing is, you're always kind of looking for that up and comer who can compete, because they probably have a little bit of stake. They may be need more in order to provide enough security or to become active. They're sharing a greater percentage of fees. So delegators kind of who are opportunistic will decentralize the network by activating new nodes in search of greater fees. So it kind of creates this level playing field. And looking the other direction, I mean, I think it is worth looking at, you know, if a big provider is doing an amazing job and has some economies of scale and is serving the network really well, you know, might they win a lot of work, accrue a lot of stake? I think that's certainly a risk. And you ask yourself, well, how bad is that for the network? If they are truly sharing a lot of fees, if they are servicing this network as cheaply as possible, what does that look like? And what would they do to essentially, you know, attack? An attack is not really an attack, but they might like try and take more margin essentially because they're winning a lot of work. But that would just create opportunity for other nodes to come in and do the work cheaper and win more work and attract more delegation. So a long rabbit hole to go down there.
Yeah, cool. I suppose there is scope for new transcoders to basically run at like a 0 reward cut to get started.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, cool. And so I guess the next question is, how will Streamflow help to increase adoption in the Livepeer protocol broadly? So how does that help make Livepeer more usable for everyday users or everyday broadcasters?
Yep. So our everyday users are developers who are building scaled video applications, right? So they might be applications, you know, versions of Twitch and YouTube and Facebook Live and these sorts of things. They might be enterprise applications like, you know, security cameras, traffic cameras, or messaging apps that include video, right? Anyone who's using video infrastructure and has lots of concurrent users and streams. And so what do they care about? They care about a solution that's reliable, and they care about a solution that's cost effective. Cost actually being a huge deterrent or blocker from startups, even including video in their applications, because their bills might be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars if they have any success with their, you know, social video app for infrastructure costs. So what Streamflow does is it aims to make the network far cheaper than the price that cloud providers are charging. So, you know, you see cloud providers charging between 50 cents and $3 per stream per hour. With Streamflow and these probabilistic micropayment mechanics and off-chain job negotiation, we're very confident we can get that down, you know, at first to below 20 or 30 cents, but there's actually, you know, we can decrease it by order of magnitude up to 100x if we can enable cryptocurrency miners to put their GPUs on the network and build the software in a way that makes this efficient. So first things first, we'll make it cheaper and make it reliable so that it can be a drop-in replacement for existing video developers. And then we can actually unlock huge savings that can enable, you know, new business use cases that weren't possible.
Okay, cool. I guess that's a good point as well, like allowing sort of new transcoders in new geographies to perhaps serve markets that currently are underserved.
Yep. I think it's what's interesting is what the node, because like these are nodes making the decisions, right? It's not really a human who's making a decision like which node do I hire. It's more like your node, it's ingesting the video, is going to try and get it encoded by this network, is going to stick with the nodes who do it well and, you know, abandon the nodes who are not doing it performantly. And so, you know, they'll test this with kind of a job negotiation and a ping time. And then the proof will be in the pudding. As I'm paying you to encode video, as long as you're sending it back to me fast enough, I'll keep paying you to do that. And through this kind of discovery process, you'll identify the local nodes, which, you know, may be right around the corner, or they may just be far away but have a very fast connection to you due to the kind of underlying architecture of the internet. And you kind of let the network detect and utilize the nodes that work best for any given you know, application. It's interesting thinking about kind of transcoding closer to the edges. So imagine you have, and you know, to build a lot of software to enable this, but imagine you have a social mobile application. People are capturing video on their phones. It's like, imagine those phones themselves being Livepeer aware and sending the video directly to a nearby transcoder. And if you have a million users all around the world, they're using many different, well, I should use the word orchestrators. They're talking to many different orchestrators who happen to be close to those applications themselves. The video doesn't all need to go to like a central server in Virginia that then disseminates it back out to the Livepeer network. So it could be really, really performant, really powerful.
Okay, cool. I guess just to briefly touch on as well, I think one of the use cases I saw a lot of opportunity in is with the recent rise of gaming, someone building on top of Livepeer to sort of disrupt something like Twitch, which collects like huge rents. So yeah, I guess it kind of helps those kind of use cases be possible as well and competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Twitch is an amazing company with an amazing product, an amazing technology suite. They're on all their own infrastructure. But even they can't transcode all of their streams. They have many, many, many thousands of concurrent streams. They can only transcode the ones that have over N number of viewers. I don't know if it's 50 or 100 or whatever it is, because it's not cost effective for them to pay for the streams with less viewers, right? Even though they know that if they transcode those streams, it can increase their audience size because people can watch it on mobile phones, lower connections, have a better experience. And just because like the lower the cost gets, the more streams that they can encode and the more audience they can capture and the more money they can make, right? So they can grow their business essentially. And so, whether you're a startup building something like Twitch, and now you can leverage Livepeer in order to actually have it be cost effective to include video, or whether you're Twitch yourself and you want to not have the human cost of running your own infrastructure, and you want to reduce your cost to increase, expand your business, both of them can benefit from kind of this open infrastructure network, right?
Okay, great. That's awesome. And so now the next question is from Raj in the Discord. So exactly how are broadcasters affected by Streamflow compared to prior to Streamflow?
From a broadcast perspective, and again, like when I say the word broadcaster, I think I'm not talking really about like an individual streamer, but I'm talking about like a developer, or a media company, or a broadcast company that's making concurrent streams. All they need to know is that the network is going to be reliable and cheap and performant for them, right? And it should just be, products should exist that just make it a drop-in replacement for their existing transcoding solution in their infrastructure. So they don't need to know anything about the crypto economics or staking changes or how video is validated or anything like that. It's just a cheaper, more performant and reliable network for them.
Okay, great. And okay, so next question: do you see any scenario where reward cut and fee share are both coming down substantially for delegators after Streamflow's implementation? What are the worst case scenarios that you could drastically impact the incentives for delegators, specifically those with small stakes? So that's from Velvet Doctor in Discord.
All right, so would reward cut and fee shares change after Streamflow? So the biggest change would be that like currently, before Streamflow, a lot of what's fueling the participation is kind of the Livepeer token and the interest rate and the speculation on that essentially, right? There's very few fees that are backing rational behavior about delegation and whatnot. So, the biggest change that would affect those numbers would be like real fees flowing into the system, essentially, scaled usage. People start based upon fee shares because they would see how much is being delegated, how many fees are generated, how much are being shared. Essentially, where can I get the biggest return per LPT that I stake in terms of fees that are paid out? So yeah, I think those numbers would move, but they'll be moving due to like rational action, right? That brings me to like, what's the biggest like concern or problem from the perspective of it. It's that staking towards a node. Early on, that node would want to offer a very nice fee share to attract your delegation, right? Stake and security, or you're helping to route work towards them, and the node values that, right? Now, if that node builds up a lot of stake of their own and they can provide enough security themselves, and they have a good reputation, they're winning a lot of work, they may squeeze you as a delegator. They may start to like reduce the fee share to say, I don't need your delegation anymore. I'm going to keep more of these fees for myself. And so in that case, being a delegator becomes kind of an active thing and an opportunity to say, oh, I'm making a little less money on this node that I helped. I'm going to move my delegation towards a node who happens to be offering a bigger share. And then you get all these questions about, and that's by the way, is a decentralizing force. I think like active delegation moving to new and up and coming nodes will create an expansion of the network and bigger footprint. You may even want to run a node yourself if you have accrued enough stake and want to kind of invest in helping the infrastructure. So yeah, I think that is kind of a new requirement on delegators that you'll see once you see real fees. But remember, it's all a spectrum. Like right now, we're on kind of like low usage, high inflation incentives. At complete and total scale, you have very little inflation, but high usage and all fees. And it's like a long way to go to get there. Like you'll be somewhere in between where there's this balance of inflation and token rewards versus fees and ether, and what do people value and how do they want to move stake around.
Okay, cool. I guess like one of the other key metrics there is obviously reliability, which is actually something in the panel that's not super clear. But yeah, I think that's a big factor a lot of people are looking at as well. Okay, and then so the next question here is, in Streamflow, what is the model for video distribution? So once the broadcaster gets the encoded video from the O, would they use a CDN or relay node to distribute the video to end users so that there is low latency? From Athene from Discord.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So distribution is up to the developer, right? The broadcaster. And so it's a complete range of options depending on their use case. And by the way, the Livepeer protocol as it exists today is first and foremost a protocol that incentivizes the transcoding piece, the compute piece. There's no incentives in there for distribution or paying anyone for distribution yet. So a separate problem that we also are doing some work on. But so one option is, hey, you're a broadcaster, you've received the encoded videos back, serve them to your users yourself, right? And that depends on what your use case is, how many users you have, what your infrastructure looks like. A popular option is put this video onto a CDN and let the CDN handle the distribution. And so that can be centralized or decentralized. Centralized is your Akamai, your Fastly, your Amazon CloudFront, right? And that fits into workflows today. The decentralized version would be put this onto IPFS or Swarm or one of these emerging content delivery projects. Now, what's really interesting and the way we want to leverage decentralization to help with distribution is there's these emerging peer-to-peer CDN accelerators. So what they do is you still need to put your content on a CDN, but you can let the peers who are watching your video also serve some of the content to the other peers. And that lets you take kind of the fallback traffic to the CDN when the video segment isn't available in the peer network. It can take the percentage of time that needs to happen down to 10 or 20 or 30%. And so you get a 60 or 70 or 80 or 90% savings on your CDN bill. But I think today we still haven't seen decentralized CDNs that are performant enough for live video and are robust for production yet. And we're really hopeful that Swarm can provide that, and IPFS can provide that, and Cache can provide that. But it's still kind of a stumbling block in the fully decentralized stack.
Okay, Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and then to expand on that question, so also similar to the CDN, ensuring video is distributed in a low latency way is ensuring that the distance between the orchestrator and transcoder and the broadcaster minimized important as well. If so, does the off-chain matching process between orchestrator and transcoder and broadcaster take into account the distance between the broadcaster and orchestrator / transcoder? Again, from Athene.
Yep, I think we were discussing that a little bit before. The off-chain process, first of all, it's important, right? What's important is that it's a low latency and performant, right? And reliable. The on-chain process assigns you to a random transcoder. So they might be around the world and that might not be reliable. The off-chain process lets you ping a bunch of transcoders, or I should say the word orchestrator, ping a bunch of orchestrators and see how quickly they respond. It allows you to start working with one or many of them, see how quickly they're doing the work and reliably they're doing that. And that can kind of become the proxy for distance. It's really like the latency and reliability. And so, yes, the node should, in a pretty efficient way, pair you up with a set of service providers who are, local in internet terms to you and are doing the work quickly and reliably. On chain, the orchestrators can give hints. We haven't designed the exact mechanism for this yet, but the idea is they could advertise the regions that they want to service to aid in the discovery process. So, hey, I'm putting my reputation on the line. I'm saying that I service the, Northern Europe or Southeast Asia or whatever, or Australia or whatever it is. And that way, broadcasters can filter by nodes that serve that region to aid in the discovery, get a good experience. And, that's a little soft. You can't really verify what someone represents on chain in terms of their location, but it can serve as a hint that good actors would use to help facilitate the process and aid their reputation in getting selected for the work.
Okay, cool. And I guess some operators would prioritize like super high quality premium video quality, and then others might be just the cheapest option.
Yeah. So that's another nice thing about kind of the service registry concept in Streamflow is that different orchestrators can advertise different services. So one can say, I'm running CPU transcoders for the highest quality output, and I'm more expensive as a result. And others can say, I have this cluster of idle GPUs, and if you use the cheapest option, with some potential hits to quality, I'll be a lot cheaper. And it's really up to the developer, the broadcaster, and what matches their kind of their needs.
Okay, great.
You can see actually extending this to additional forms of video related or even non-video related compute way down the line in the future. But you think of CPU and GPU transcoding as just kind of two options, but you could also look at doing things like image recognition or analysis on the video for whatever your use case is, like labeling the scene with the items that are in it, or identifying moments in a traffic cam when a car crossed the intersection, or whether the light was red or yellow, or these sorts of things. And so if these sorts of services are offered for a price on the network, you could think about hiring an orchestrator to perform those sorts of services as well, but that's a little bit down the line.
Okay, cool. I was just going to say, guys, while we're going through, if anyone does have any questions they'd like to add, just feel free to post them in the general on Discord. Okay, great. And then so the next question we have here, so we're just moving on to the Reddit questions. So does Streamflow change in any meaningful way the 2-minute explainer you'd give a video dev on how Livepeer's transcoding works? And does it change the way you briefly explain the protocol to a non-technical broadcaster?
Right. I think if they were super familiar with Livepeer already, then again, I would tell them that this will make things more reliable and cheaper. But I don't think it actually changes kind of what you should represent the product is for them, right? It's still the same interface to the same transcoding service under the hood. It's still a replacement for their existing infrastructure that either they're running themselves or paying a cloud provider to do. And so no, I don't think you have huge changes there.
Okay, great. And okay, so the next one, another Reddit question. So are broadcasters expected to find/choose orchestrators solely based on the service registry? How does a new orchestrator get in? What are the min staking requirements? So I think we have briefly sort of touched on some of these. But yeah, did you want to sort of expand on that?
Yep. So basically, if orchestrators stake enough, then they get added to the service registry, so they're discoverable on chain, and that advertises what services they're providing and what regions they're in potentially. And then that's kind of the jumpstart for the off-chain negotiation process. So a video developer, broadcaster runs a node, they send video into it, their node will see who's in the service registry, it'll filter it by whatever criteria the developer requires, what type of work do they need done, what price are they willing to pay, what regions do they care about, how much stake do they require, and then they'll begin the off-chain process of pinging those nodes to get a price quote to see who's available. They'll start working with one or multiple, and then as long as the video is encoded quickly and correctly, they don't need to switch. But if one of them lags for a segment or doesn't encode the video, they might start working with another node in order to get the redundancy and reliability that they need.
Okay, great. And there's just another question here. So it's from Philip Heather on Reddit. It was just another question they had on the last one. So which network economic stats do you think deserve more visibility apart from those on Supermax? Or in a different manner or focus?
Yep. So right now, there's very little visibility into the fee performance of orchestrators. So, how many fees did they generate yesterday, today, last week, last month? There's very little visibility into whether they've been slashed or penalized or not in the past. And there's very little visibility into viably called reward and generated the inflationary tokens. You can dig into the details to find all this information, but people would really appreciate a transcoder level summary that's accessible at a glance, that gives people the information they need to kind of make the right delegation decisions. So I think those all deserve more visibility. I actually think third parties, like community members, are probably better set up to kind of run at this goal and build like the great delegation metrics tool to help themselves, to help the rest of the community, than kind of like the core team that needs to remain like pretty like general purpose and non-biased and just like create access to kind of the bare protocol for everyone to build on top of. I think, it's kind of like saying there's an incentive for someone to go out and build Etherscan or my crypto, my Ether wallet, and make those tools as helpful as possible to the community for their own self-motivated purpose business model. Whereas, the just needs to kind of create the generic mist wallet, for example, with the bare bones functionality, and can't like bias towards any projects, or in our case, like you can't bias towards specific transcoders or anything like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stats that could be really useful to people that they could visualize.
Okay, and I guess if a transcoder did have a great track record of being reliable, that they could sort of make some of those stats public themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see people socially do it in the forums, which is good. And it would be great if those identities, track records and campaigns were also tied to the addresses that people are delegating to a little more visibly, right? So if you know which node is which campaign and what they're representing, it might help delegators make the right decisions.
Okay. Yeah, cool. All right, and so next question, are there any stats available covering the demand side for broadcasters and consumers over time on a weekly/monthly base, like amount of streams, time streamed, DAUs, etc., or any dApps being built on top of Livepeer? From Alexander.
Right, so this question is about usage of the network, essentially, and where can we find stats about this? So look at Supermax, the tool. You can filter by some of the events and transactions that indicate usage. So there's the job transaction. I think it's called claim, or what's it called, release fees, distribute fees transaction. And what you'll see on mainnet is it's been pretty low, right? It's been used for proofs of concept, for testing, for events. If you look at testnet, actually, you see many thousands of streams where it's totally free and people are testing things. The whole reason is, it's great to demonstrate this network works and it's usable, but until it's actually cheaper than the centralized alternatives and reliable enough, you can't approach developers with scaled applications using a solution. To kind of the second question that he asked, which was around, are there people using this? And the answer is, there are many apps who we've talked to and worked with who are feeling the pain of transcoding providers, and they're very open to running on Livepeer when we can represent that it's cheap enough and reliable enough. And our first step there is, as we're building Streamflow, to run that they can use and switch onto. And then with the idea of switching over to the mainnet when Streamflow goes live and it's released. And we're doing that sort of development and partner effort and have some loose commitments, but we have a lot of work to do on building, and I wouldn't sit here and tell you that there's huge apps that are going live on Livepeer until we've built Streamflow and it's live. I think the fastest thing we can do is to accelerate the building of Streamflow, the testing of Streamflow, the review of these concepts and feedback to make sure that we get it right. Okay.
Yeah, brilliant.
I see time check. I see we have a couple minutes left too, so I just wanted to mention if anyone else on the call or wants to jump in or anything. A couple minutes left, so it might be a good time.
Okay, cool. Well, if not, we've got a few more questions on Reddit here we can just run through quickly. So exactly how are broadcasters affected by Streamflow compared to the prior Streamflow? I think we may have already touched on this one. So that's from Raj.
Sorry, what was it in here? The price?
Exactly how are broadcasters affected by Streamflow compared to the prior Streamflow?
Yeah, I think we addressed that before. They'll see a cheaper price and more reliability.
Okay, cool. All right, so this next one, how do you deal with gas costs arising from transcoded selection? From Moshe on Reddit.
Good question. So, right, so I think that was once we dramatically expand the number of transcoders, that would increase the gas costs of running all the on-chain calculations of which transcoder gets selected and whatnot. And with moving the transcoder selection off-chain, that no longer becomes an issue. And with using probabilistic micropayments off-chain, basically we become immune to fluctuations in gas prices. It's not fair to say we're totally immune, but the idea is, let's say it would cost you $1 to cash in a micropayments ticket that wins, right? So as an orchestrator could say, well, I only want to receive $100 tickets. And so the cost to cash in is 1%. Whereas if the gas price goes up, it becomes $5. Well, the orchestrator could say, oh, I only want to receive $500 tickets. And so again, the cost to cash it in is 1%. And so regardless of what the gas price was, the orchestrator gets to control kind of their overhead cost for cashing a ticket. Now there's some negatives to having a higher ticket value, and it's harder to secure that and could affect usage a little. So you're not totally immune, but it's a huge step in the right direction, and would make it so that you would always be able to do work on this network affordably, regardless of where gas prices are. Now, where you still will see an impact from gas prices is on the token holder side. So delegation, staking, bonding, doing these sorts of actions. There, you still have to pay the gas costs, and the network gets expensive to use. It's expensive to use. The idea is that those are very low frequency actions, though. Like you might change your delegation once a day, once a week, once a month, whereas these transcoders may be interacting with the blockchain frequently, and so you want to make the loop really cheap for the broadcasters and users of the network. The kind of token holding stakeholders, delegators, etc. They might see some exposure to fluctuations in cost, but they kind of are longer term committed to this network, hold bigger stakes, etc.
Okay, cool. And one other question I just had. So what kind of risks or trade-offs does this sort of Streamflow proposal make?
Right. So by taking some of the payments and whatnot off-chain, you're introducing a little more risk, a little more trust into the system. So just as an example, if I'm sending you payments to encode my video, you're an orchestrator, you might get away with a payment from me and not actually do the work, right? And we said, that's okay, because for one segment of video, you're charging me a fraction of a penny. And if you don't send it back to me, I'm not going to keep working with you. And yeah, you got away with that. But in reality, I'm going to spend many dollars with someone else instead of you, right? So you kind of lost out on a future opportunity to do work. So we said, that's okay. But there's some, there's some payments situations, some may enter the system and have to pay more than the amount of work they did because they got unlucky and lost a ticket. So it may not make the system especially attractive for, let's say, a smaller broadcaster who just wants to show up and do one stream and disappear and never use it again. But that's not really the target user. That's not someone who's going to do a deep integration with a Livepeer node and build an app just for one stream where they're going to spend 50 cents. The real users are using scaled video infrastructure. They're spending thousands of dollars on this every month, and they're doing a lot of streams. And over time, the probabilities are they're going to pay for exactly what they use.
Okay, great. Okay, so we just got two more to get through. So is it technically possible that a limited number of transcoders will take all orders/demand, leaving the others out of business? Over time, they switch their hardware from Livepeer to another chain. That's from Kovalenko Jan on Reddit.
Interesting. So the idea is very few actors get all of the work, and then so first of all, let's look at that. So they would have to be charging a cheap enough price such that no one could reasonably compete with them, right? And then the question becomes, okay, is that a bad thing for the users of the network, right? So that's a situation like they've acquired a lot of work capacity. They're not attacking the network because they're the cheapest transcoding option on the planet. And no one has a model where they can even subsidize it to make it cheaper in favor of long-term growth or in favor of decentralization. So that if the network prioritizes decentralization, people may, stake towards other competing nodes who are charging a lower cost and kind of emphasize decentralization, right? So that's kind of the pre-attack scenario. Is that such a bad thing? I think that's debatable. We figure that out, right? The attack scenario then that he described is they would leave the Livepeer network And the idea is that all the people who have done deep integrations to work with the Livepeer protocol and Livepeer network have to change those in order to remove themselves from the network and go somewhere else. I mean, that seems like a big ask, especially, you know, as you've done a technical integration, you're running your scaled app on this, switching to work on an entirely new protocol is, I think, a challenge. So that's a little bit of a barrier. And on the network, that would just create opportunity for other competitors to come in and take that work. So
yeah, true.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, cool. And look, so we've just got one last question. So do you plan to integrate stablecoins? If yes, I would suggest supporting DGX. DGX, the integration might be done by DGX team. Them, of course, Gemini, Coin, and Circle.
Awesome. I would love for Livepeer to support stablecoins, because that would let people price their services in a non-volatile asset like a dollar or a euro or whatever it's stable pegged to. That would be great for usability. It's, you know, not the first priority because it's not dependent on making the network cheap or reliable for broadcasters, but I would very much welcome outside contribution. If someone wants to take that on, it would be excellent. And I think there's a whole variety of candidate stablecoins that could all theoretically be supported.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. So it looks like we are out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's been great to run through Livepeer with you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting it. That's great moderation. I look forward to doing this again sometime soon. Maybe when we get a little closer to Streamflow launch.
Okay. All right, brilliant. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Nelson. See everyone later.